Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video of Mains Rapid Revision series, we are going to deal with the bilateral relationship of some of the major superpowers of the world, that is India's relationship with US as well as with Russia. So, we will cover this relationship in two parts. The first part we will be covering into India's US relationship, and second part we will be covering India-Russia relationship. So, delving into this relationship deeper, we are here to understand about the economic relationship between India and US, peace and security relationship in all other terms such as trade and so many other factors. We will also be delving into little detail about the issues that are persisting between India and US and how do we tend to resolve these issues. Talking about these the relationship in terms of economic relationship one by one. So, India is heavily engaged in terms of trade with US. In fact, US is one of the top export destinations for Indian merchandise. Not only this, India's defense supplies, I am talking about the subparts, the defense equipment subparts, one of the biggest buyers is also USA. If we talk about what are the top 10 products that India exports to USA, it consists of electrical and electronic equipments, precious pearl stones, pharmaceutical products, and in fact, the crude oil that we import from various nations including Iran and Russia is also refined and sold to USA. So, some of the crude oil refined products is also one of the products that US largely buys from India. So, these are some of the important economic engagements between India and USA, but there is one very important thing which is crucial to the shift towards renewable energy sector, and that is the critical mineral supply. The supply of rare earth minerals and critical minerals such as cobalt, lithium, इसके लिए US has initiated, or I should call this as a US led initiative called Mineral Securities Partnership. Before we delve into India's engagement with USA into Mineral Securities Partnership, I want to give you a background of this organization. Mineral Securities Partnership was largely backed by this fact that some of the major deposits of critical minerals largely lies with China. Although these minerals are also present in Africa, but China largely controls its presence in Africa as well. Thus, if we have to ensure the supply of critical minerals and have to ensure that rest of the countries are also able to successfully shift towards renewable energy, then it is very imperative to ensure a complete supply chain, global supply chain, which is insulated with the Chinese behavior of controlled supply. For example, China has tried to alter the supply of phosphorus, of lithium, of cobalt time and again. So, in such case, India has tried to engage with other countries. For example, recently the Prime Minister had visited countries like Nigeria, Gambia, Brazil and so many other nations including Argentina for that matter, who are some of the largest reserves of such kind of critical minerals. In such case, this organization called Mineral Securities Partnership will be able to ensure that there will be a secure global supply chain of critical minerals, and this is a US led initiative which India is also participating into. So, that is another economic relationship between India and US, and India also acts as the China plus one strategy part of what the Western world sees. So, what is China plus one strategy? The Western world actually understands this fact that China has tried to alter the labor market, raw materials market through the controlled supply of these facilities. So, time and again, Western countries have tried to look for an alternative. If not for China, which other country should we be dependent upon? For labor markets, they have found India as a very suitable option. Thus, India becomes part of China plus one strategy of what Western world visualizes. So, this is the economic engagement. Talking about the peace and security grouping of India and US, peace and security engagement of India and US, both these countries are advocative of free and open Indo-Pacific. So, free and open Indo-Pacific, because it turns out to be one of the important agendas of Quad initiative which consists of countries like India, US, Australia and Japan. So, this also turns out to be one of the organizations who will be ensuring that there is open access of every country to Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean. These regions will remain secure and will not be affected by some of the intentions of some of the countries like China. So that is peace and security engagement between India and US. If we talk about space engagements, so India and US are jointly collaborating into a project called NISAR, that stands for NASA and ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar. If we don't delve into the technicalities and just delve into what is the significance of NISAR, so there are two important things. They will help us study about climate change. Synthetic Aperture Radar or NASA ISRO NISAR satellites will help us study about climate change and will also help us to better predict some of the major geographical changes, geological changes. These can be better predicted using the NISAR satellite. So, conditions such as tsunami, conditions such as earthquake, volcanism, these can be better predicted by such kind of satellites. Additionally, in terms of space engagements, India, which usually used to send their astronauts to Russia for training, has recently started sending their astronauts to Johnson Space Center in USA as well. So, training of astronauts, maybe US has tried to engage with India. Last but not the least, both these countries are also having this agreement that the outer space must be used for peaceful purposes and non-nuclear purposes itself only. The outer space should not be the domain of warfare, just like what happened in the phase of the Cold War, where the countries were competing in terms of science, in terms of space, in terms of technology, in terms of land, air, water. So, this should not come up again. So, that time we used to have an outer space treaty which was initially backed out by countries like USA as well as Russia. Initially, although USA, later on by Russia. But now outer space treaty has no significance. It has largely been replaced by something called an Artemis Accord. This accord, or whichever country is the signatory of Artemis Accord, is talking about the peaceful use of outer space. Peaceful use of outer space. Now this has been signed by India, which we will see that this acts as a point of contention between India and Russia. As of now, India is a signatory to the Artemis Accord. If we talk about the defense cooperation, so defense modernization mein India and US have signed some of the important agreements. We will be delving into what are the agreements that we have signed into, but the capacity development, and this is a 10-year engagement strategy. This is not a deal of 12 aircrafts or 36 aircrafts or Poison or submarine hunters. No, this is not specific to one specific defense equipment. It is engaging in defense artilleries or defense, all kinds of defense equipments that India needs for next 10 years will be largely being supplied. US has given us an option that you can buy it from USA. ठीक है? So what is this, or what is this agreement we will be delving into? But apart from this, in terms of defense, India and US along with other countries, although we do have Japan and Australia, we have a regular exercise of Army, Navy and Air Force with respect to naval training. This is known as the Malabar exercise, which is carried out in the Indian Ocean. Now talking about some of the major defense deals that India has signed with USA at the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, our Prime Minister had visited USA also because the President of USA was newly elected and he had some kind of I would say annoyance, some kind of dissatisfaction with respect to the agricultural protectionism that India exhibits for its farmers. We do agree that India follows some amount of protectionism for Indian farmers, and that is largely because Indian farmers or the entire agriculture sector in India is not competitive enough as of now to face the global competitions. So in that case, we have to, and given the fact that India is one of the largest producers of wheat, rice and so many other agricultural produce, India needs to be protective of its farmers. So when the Prime Minister had visited USA, we have tried to relax certain rules such that the markets, American markets should be open for Indian agricultural produce. But additionally, Indian Prime Minister has also signed some of the major defense deals. Talking about these defense deals is the Javelin anti-tank guided missiles. Although the name suggests that this is an anti-tank guided missiles, this can be used for retaliatory action against UAVs, or even low flying helicopters, or as well as of course the tanks. These, as is exhibited here, are man portable handheld devices and can be used for wartime purposes. These are the Javelin anti-tank guided missiles which US has offered to India to be bought at a relatively cheaper rate. Additionally, US has also given India an option to buy the Striker infantry combat vehicle. Now, a Striker infantry combat vehicle, India also makes use of some of the combat vehicles which are usually working on a conveyor belt. Now, because the combat vehicle moves on a conveyor belt, the overall movement of the vehicle is very slow. On the other hand, this Striker infantry combat vehicle, which is capable of carrying 9 people, the combat vehicles that India has maximally can carry 1 or 2 individuals. These combat vehicles can carry 9 people and can move much faster as compared to the conventional combat vehicles that India has. Moving on to the next defense deal, India has signed agreement for P8Is. Now, what are P8Is? P8Is are also known as submarine hunters. So, they in marine domain can look and find for submarines and can launch attack against the submarines. The submarines will be destroyed in water. These are also known as poidons. P8Is poidons are also known as the submarine hunters which US has offered India to buy. If we talk about some of the agreements, these were some of the equipments that US has offered India to buy. But if we talk about some of the agreements, one is a trust initiative signed between India and USA. This trust initiative is in the domain of AI, in the domain of technology transfer, in the domain of science and technology. So, if you need any help in terms of science and technology or in terms of AI or in terms of development of lethal weapons, autonomous systems of weapons, these knowledge transfer, technology transfer will be guided through this initiative, trust initiative. And last but not the least is the compact initiative. Compact initiative is the one that we were talking about, that this will be a 10-year deal between India and USA, and this is not specific to one defense equipment and let's say a guided missile, anti-tank guided missile or a combat vehicle or a single aeroplane or a fighter jet. No, this is talking about 10-year agreement between India and USA ki whatever be the defense equipments that India needs to buy, they can buy, whatever be the technology transfer they can carry out with USA in that 10-year period. So, that is some of the recent developments that India and US have signed in the month of January. Now, delving into the issues between India and USA, if we discuss about the issues, the first major point of contention is the Russia relationship. India's closeness with Russia, and India has time and again abstained to vote against Russia. Whenever Russia has attacked Crimea or Russia has attacked Ukraine, India has always abstained to vote against Russia. And that acts as a major point of contention between India and USA. The second important problem between India and USA is the BRICS. And BRICS was founded on the principle of de-dollarization. That the countries who are members to BRICS have tried to reduce the overall emphasis on dollar. That was largely because of the 2008 subprime crisis, but all the countries have agreed to this point that we have given so much importance to dollar which cannot be trusted upon blindly. So, we need to internationalize other currencies, and that reduces the overall hegemony of dollar. This has largely been against the interest of USA. Another major point of contention between India and USA is the tariff wars. We know this year that on the Liberation Day, although US has backed out of it and has given a 90-day moratorium, but on that Liberation Day, US had put up reciprocal tariff. So, the kind of tariff India imposes on USA will be imposing on India. Now, there are major sectors wherein India has followed protectionism. If US also tries to follow such kind of protectionism for the sectors which it doesn't even need, so then there will be some retaliatory issues, there will be tariff wars, trade wars. That has turned out to be one of the major point of contention between India and USA. Additionally, there has been time and again there has been trade barriers imposed by USA and protectionism. For example, some of the major developed countries of the world who have already taken so far the advantages of globalization are shifting towards anti-globalization or protectionism. That is, they have tried to support, be protective of their own sectors. For example, European Union CBAM, or for that matter US trying to protect its let's say manufacturing sector, steel sector, aluminium sector. So that kind of protectionism acts as a point of contention between India and USA. Additionally, to ensure that we are also export competitive in nature, we have tried to reduce our imports, and import substitution has been carried out. We have tried to produce the goods in India. We have incentivized the production in India through Make in India scheme or production linked incentive scheme, and that acts as a point of contention between India and USA. Another major issue is the issue of the climate finance. US has been part of those developed countries who have been always reluctant to fund developing as well as least developed nations for the overall climate related measures. Let's say IPCC has stated that the overall developing world as well as the least developed world requires $1.3 trillion per annum to even fulfill their INDCs. Even if you want the 50% of these INDCs to be fulfilled, you need to fund them. The developed countries needs to fund them, and US is one such country who has largely disagreed to this kind of fact. Additionally, of late there has also been visa and immigration related challenges. Issuance of H1B visa has also been point of contention, and last but not the least, US has of late started to support Pakistan. US for that matter had been progressive about this fact that Pakistan needs to be given funds from IMF bailout package even during Operation Sindoor, even during a point of time wherein India and USA were engaged in war. US was ready to fund, or I should say IMF, largely backed by USA, was ready to fund Pakistan. So that also acted as major point of contention between India and USA. Now, talking about solutions and suggestive steps, how do we improve this relationship? The first point should be that India should go for a calibrated trade measure. Whatever trade measures India is taking in terms of protectionism, in terms of free trade agreement, in terms of bilateral trade agreements, India should be calibrative and calculative in this manner. That we should be protective of this fact that there are sectors who requires protection. There are sectors who are competitive in nature and they might not be required protection. If they are open to the international market, we may gain out of that relationship. So we need to look at the sector and be calculative in opening up our trade. Secondly, India should also go for cautious defense deals. For example, US gave us an option of buying F-35. On the other hand, Russia had also given us an option of buying Sukhoi 57. But in this case, buying a F-35 would be much more costlier. Its integration with Indian Air Force and the entire system would be much more difficult as compared to Sukhoi 57. So whenever we are signing some kind of defense deal, it is not just economics, it is also its integration, assimilation, adaptation that we should be noting upon. Next, India should sign bilateral trade agreements to reduce the trade and tariff wars. The overall trade barriers should be minimalized, और उसके लिए we need to sign more and more bilateral trade agreements in different domains. Second last is the data localization issue. Now that is also major point of contention. Of late this has started out to be major point of contention that countries like USA or European Union have happily supported data localization in their own nation. But if countries like India support for data localization to be kept within India, they are not supportive of this fact. So this kind of hypocrisy is not going to work. India needs to be open and vocal about data localization, and all the data that is being generated by Indians must remain within India to be used only by Indians, and the economics must remain within India is what India should emphasize time and again. Next is the enhancement of cooperation in AI regulations. For example, we recently had the AI Action Summit, which was talking about sustainable AI, but it was not largely supported by countries like US and UK. So regulations of AI, that we need to ensure that the biasness related to AI needs to be reduced, sustainability of AI needs to be ensured. These things needs to be prioritized whenever we are signing a deal with respect to USA. So with that, we have completed India-US relationship, the recent developments, and what are the current engagements so far with USA. Now moving on to India-Russia relationship. The next country in bilateral relationship is Russia. So if we talk about India's relationship with Russia, it has been a very long-standing one. Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty, which our former Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi had signed in August 1971. And just 2 months later on, that was in the month of October-November, when Bangladesh was facing issues, or rather East Pakistan was facing issues, and India had to intervene because of the refugee crisis. In all of this situation of Bangladesh liberation war that India was fighting against Pakistan, Russia trusted us. Russia was ready to provide us with not only MiG fighter planes, but also INS Vikrant, which was the sole aircraft carrier that India had in that time. So talking about Russia, this is a time-tested, sound relationship. If we talk about the cooperations, if we talk about India and Russia cooperations, so India is heavily dependent on Russian crude oil, most lately because of the cheaper oils. Russia is facing sanctions from the Western world, and because of which it is not able to sell off the crude oil to many countries. And India acts as one such country, one such destination who is ready to buy oil because it is available at a cheaper rate. In fact, if we talk about some of the Western nations who are the buyers of refined products of crude petroleum from India, so for all these countries, including USA, UK, Canada for that matter, Brazil, France, Germany, Italy, all these countries, for all these countries, India is acting as a backdoor entry for Russian crude oil itself. Okay? So if we talk about the economic relationship, of course, of lately, crude oil, India has been significantly importing crude oil from Russia, but otherwise, pharmaceutical, electronics, iron and steel, these are also some of the sectors wherein India and Russia are collaborating. India is supplier of cheap pharmaceutical products, generic pharmaceutical products to Russia. If we talk about the bilateral merchandise trade between Russia and India, so Russia's exports to India, that is one of the things that we are buying largely from Russia, includes mineral fuels, mineral oils and the products of their distillation. Pearls, precious and semi-precious stones and precious metals are the large good of things that India is importing from Russia. But what are the things that we are exporting to Russia? Russia's imports from India, or what are the things that India is selling off to Russia, includes mineral fuels, mineral oils and the products of their distillation. So we are selling them crude petroleum refined products. Okay? And pearls, precious stones is a filtered product. For example, we buy the raw material for the precious stones, but the finished goods, the gems, stones, jewelries, all of these are exported from India. Okay, talking about, so this is not the only end of relationship between India and Russia in terms of economic cooperation. Russia has also agreed to supply us with coal. In fact, 2024 May, the first batch of coal came to India through the INSTC. INSTC stands for International North-South Transport Corridor, which was initiated in 2014 itself between Russia, Iran and India initially, but then later on so many countries have joined this. 2024 marked the first year when the first batch of coal was received to India from the INSTC corridor. In fact, if we talk about the trade routes, so Russia has given us an option of an exclusive trade route connecting Chennai and Vladivostok. And thereby, India is also given an access through the North Sea route, through the Murmansk cargo traffic, 37%, which is responsible for 37% of the global traffic. A huge amount of Indian goods are also exported through the North Sea route. Okay? Additionally, in terms of nuclear power corporation also, India's nuclear power plant at Kudankulam has been established by Russia. If we talk about the multilateral engagements or the multilateral groupings where India and Russia are engaged, they are engaged in one very prime and esteemed organization called BRICS, wherein we have already studied about BRICS, that the prime focus of BRICS is de-dollarization. Although there are so many other agendas that BRICS has started coming up, including climate finance. But apart from BRICS, India and Russia are also collaborating on Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the lines of G20 as well. If we talk in terms of defense cooperation, so India has been largely, if I talk about let's say 4-5 years back, India has been one of the biggest buyers of defense produce from Russia. You name a fighter jet aircraft carrier that we have in India, they will be largely coming on from Russia itself. Largely. Okay? But it is not only this. Apart from this, we also have so many anti-tank missiles. We have so many aircraft carriers which we are buying from Russia. So if we talk about some of the missiles such as BrahMos, India has built with collaboration with Russia. Sukhoi 30 and S-400 defense system. S-400 defense system is also provided to India by Russia itself. In fact, we also regularly carry out bilateral military exercise known as Indra. Additionally, we are also cooperating along the space lines. So, when studying about India-US relationship, remember we have studied that Indian astronauts recently have been being sent to Johnson Space Center in USA. But earlier, they were being sent to Russia for training. So, space cooperation, maybe Russia has helped India. In fact, the first satellite that India had launched was also Aryabhat, was also in collaboration with Russia itself. In fact, the Gaganyaan mission, which is India's first manned mission to space, that is also in collaboration with Russia, and Russia is helping India to build its own GPS system, that's the Navik, in collaboration with the GLONASS, that is the global positioning system of Russia. So along the lines of GLONASS, India's Navik will also be developed. This is how Russia and India are collaborating in space. Talking about the overall significance of this relationship, as we have discussed, since 1971, if we talk about one country for which India has always stood for and one country for which Russia has always stood for is, we are both for each other. India has abstained to vote against Russia time and again when Russia faced problems with Ukraine, when there were United Nations General Assembly resolutions passed against Russia, India stood for Russia. So there has been time and again intense support that India has provided to Russians, and in fact Russians have also provided to Indians. For example, some of the most oldest industries that we know in India with respect to steel, with respect to dam, with respect to aluminium are all set up with the Russian collaboration itself. Both these countries, as we discussed, have been standing in geopolitical support for each other. But additionally also, at the time of war, both the countries have always stood for each other. So this relationship in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of security, in terms of economics, in terms of politics, this is a very time-tested relationship. Yet, of course, there are certain issues in this relationship, and the first major issue is India's alignment towards Western nations, such as creation of groupings such as Quad, India joining US-led Artemis mission. These are the areas which are acting as a spot in the eye of Russians. India-US growing alliances through various options and organizations that we have studied so far. Additionally, some of the major defense imports that India was carrying out from Russia, we have tried to reduce it and diversify it to other countries such as France and Israel. So we have tried to reduce our defense imports from Russia because of international pressure, and we have tried to divert it to other nations, and that is why India is facing criticism. And that is why it is acting as a decline in relationship between India and Russia. Russia's China proximity is also one major problem because Russia has both the nations being more or less left aligned, and plus lack of democracy in both the nations have ensured that they are thinking along the same line of dominance, which is not the case with India. So Russia and China are growing in proximity to each other, which acts as a point of contention for India. Talking about Russia building steel mills in Karachi of late, Russia has collaborated with Pakistan to help revive World War II era steel mills in Karachi. So that is also acting as a point of contention that why Russia is one such country who has always stood for India. Then why are you standing in support of a country like Pakistan? Additionally, there are also trade gaps because our exports are not as competitive as Russian exports. Russians are exporting some very high valued products. On the other hand, the products that are being exported from India are relatively of lesser value. So we are not able to create a balance in a trade, and that is why if we talk in terms of trade, it is much more biased in favor of Russia. Last but not the least is the Western sanctions and the crude oil imports that India is carrying out from Russia. We are under immense amount of pressure. India is under immense pressure to buy crude oil, and we have not been able to ensure smooth functioning of buying of these crude oils. So these were the list of issues that India is having with respect to Russia and Russia is having with respect to India. But if we talk about the way forward, how do we improve this relationship? We need to diversify our economic engagements. So for example, we need to include more and more goods to carry out trade between these two countries. We need to think towards a free trade agreement for a limited set of goods itself. But we need to think of a free trade agreement with this country. Additionally, defense co-development. For example, Make in India and PLI has ensured development of defense-related equipments in India. But still, we have not been able to ensure that all the goods or not many number of goods should be produced in India. And because in terms of technology, Russia is having an upper hand with respect to India. So here we need to take some help from Russia and ensure that under Make in India program and PLI, that is Production Linked Incentive Scheme, India should carry out development of these products in India itself. Additionally, there are so many other areas wherein India and Russia can collaborate is the Arctic collaboration. Russia, for that matter, is member of the Arctic Council. Arctic Council consists of all those countries who are in contact with 66.5 degree north and above. So if the countries are lying on 66.5 degree or above, all of these countries will be part of the Arctic Council. Although India is not a permanent member, but we do have an observer status in Arctic Council. Arctic Council is very important because of the presence of crude oil and natural gas in this region, and that is why India can better collaborate. If we have a scope with Russia, we will be able to better access the resources or even carry out trade through these areas. Additionally, renewable energy, which India is already sufficiently focusing upon, but we do have sufficient amount of international pressure to shift away from coal, Russia can act as a help in such cases, especially in setting up of further nuclear power plants, which is a relatively cleaner form of energy, even if not renewable. Last but not the least, it can be the domains of cybersecurity, digital collaboration, in fact, data localization also, wherein India and Russia can at least take a stand for each other. So with that, we have completed the relationship between India and Russia and some of the major recent developments between these two countries. We will continue our mains rapid revision series in the next video. Thank you so much and all the very best.